Welcome to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to remove the engine from a 99 to 03 Super Duty with a 7.3 in it, and also how to replace the oil pan using some somewhat unconventional methods. But, you know, not everybody has a complete shop with a lift and all kinds of other fancy tools and whatnot. A lot of you guys that are watching this might be just doing this in your garage like I did. So I'm going to show you some ways that are maybe not exactly the right way to do it, but they will work. So I'm just kind of putting some final touches on the video right now, which I recorded the video almost a year ago at this point. So forgive me for that. Some of the stuff isn't exactly the greatest and probably left some details out. But after watching this, you should have a pretty good idea on how to do the job. And it's a long video, I know, but I would actually recommend watching the entire video first and then go about doing the job. There's a lot of stuff in here that doesn't exactly have to be done in the order that I did it, but some of it obviously has to be. And let's face it, considering that I recorded this a year ago, my video taking skills have certainly gotten better since. So take it for what it is, but this video should help a DIY mechanic be able to do this job themselves and hopefully not have to spend, you know, a couple $1,000s to have a dealership or an independent shop do this job for them. And also I recommend watching the entire video from start to finish just to make sure that you feel by the end of it that you're confident enough in your own skills to do this job. It's not exactly for the faint of heart. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of stuff needs to be taken off, and there's a very large possibility that you could screw something up. So if after watching this video you feel you're not confident in doing it, by all means have another shop do it. At least then you can go in armed with a little bit of knowledge. But if after watching it you feel that you can do it, which I think just about anybody can, you just have to have some patience and pay very close attention to what you're doing, because obviously there's a lot of stuff that needs to be removed because we're pulling the entire engine out of the truck. So with that said, sit back, relax, watch the video, enjoy or not enjoy, I don't really care. You may want to grab yourself a adult beverage. And yeah, let's get to work here. Oh yeah. Since the motor has to come out, if you have to pull your engine for any other reason, feel free to watch this video, as you know, obviously the process is going to be mostly the same and you can just skip the oil pan part of it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is remove your front clip. The grill comes off pretty easy. There's 4 of these screws here. They're Phillips head right across the top. And then underneath the grill, you might find it easier to take the bumper off first, but my helper isn't here yet, so I'm just working on the stuff that I can right now. So you get your screwdriver up underneath there, push down on it, and then, well, actually you're lifting up on the clip. It's just spring tension, but lift up on it and give it a pull. And there you go. Next, you're going to take your marker light assembly out, turn signal. There's a screw there, Phillips head, and one over there. You'll take those out. Then you're just going to take it, once you get those screws out, and pull on it. Mine is stuck. Turn it to the left, the bulb pops out. And then the same with your other one over here, your turn signal bulb. I'm going to process is the same on both sides, so I'm only going to show you one. And that's out. Sounds like my helper's here. One thing I'd recommend, since there's a lot of little screws that we got to take off here, is you know, when you get a part out, just take them and thread them in a few turns where you took them out of, so you don't lose them. Normally the bumper has two little clips on the back, or a bracket with nuts welded to it. My previous owner wasn't nice enough to use that, so we have to have a little bit more complicated setup here with a wrench. A helper's definitely useful because this isn't exactly light. And before you take the bumper completely off the truck, there's some brackets and stuff, wiring stuff. I used to have fog lights. You have to unplug those. There's some, I think usually your block heater might be hooked up to it somehow or another. Mine was already disconnected because my truck is old and kind of had the crap beat out of it, so I didn't have to worry about any of that stuff, but you probably will, depending on how good a condition your truck is. There's also a little flap thing that goes underneath. Kind of helps protect the radiator and stuff. Mine is missing. You may not have it either. Next, you're going to want to take this piece off here. It's just got the little push pins. Pop them up. There's several of them there. Just pop them all out and this lifts out. Then you're going to want to take your jacking tools off. 2 8mm there, one there, 2 more right there. You're also going to have to remove the tire iron part because there's a 8mm there that holds the coolant bottle on. And it comes right out. Maybe. Yep, there it goes. Now is probably a good time to remove the batteries. Technically, probably should have done this first, but whatever. Should be 1/2 inch on the terminals, and then your hold downs are 8mm. Next, you're going to want to take the header panel out. Should be able to just leave the headlights attached. Just take the bulbs out. There's 8mm there, and then that one there. You can get through this hole, and then that one down there on the bottom, and the brackets should just come off. You have to remove the little flap things here. It's attached to the header panel. And just little push pins. Invest in one of these. If you want, you can pop these little winglets off with the header panel. Just more of the little push pin jobbies. I think I broke one.
Out of the fender?
Yeah, that side's already busted off from when I got hit. And next you're going to want to take this piece here out. You got to get your battery cables taken off, your hood latch, that's 8mm. And then there's 4 bolts. There's 2 on the other side. These are 13s. Get your battery cable out of the way. Your upper intercooler supports, those are 10mm. There's actually 8 of these 13mm bolts because there's 2 on the back side as well on both sides. You're also going to want to remove the AC condenser brackets. Those are 8mm as well. And then the little push pins on the flappy thing. Once you get everything loose from that cross piece there, you're going to have to kind of pry it out a little bit. I've already got it out some, but you're going to have to spread the sides of the truck out a little bit with it, and then it just pops out of there. Oh. And at some point, you're going to need to drain the coolant, obviously. On the driver's side of the truck, there's your drain there. It's a good time to do a coolant flush if you haven't done one already. I've already done one, so I'm just going to keep it in a very clean bucket. And take a 3/4 inch socket, open that up. Ah, yeah. And then I'm going to go ahead and crack that radiator cap, or the coolant bottle cap loose up there. If you don't crack that open, you'll be here for days waiting for this to drain. So while it's draining, crack yourself a beer and wait. Next, you're going to want to take out the coolant bottle, degas, degas, however you want to pronounce it. At this point, you should have already removed that screw. There's 2 more 8mm down there. Hose there. Ooh! I about bit it. And yeah, there's a hose on the bottom. All right, so that hose is connected to the bottle up there. That's easiest just to take it off from down here. Just grab some channel locks and take that one off, and then just pull the whole thing out. When you take this bottom hose off, be sure to have a bucket ready, because this is going to happen. Make sure you get the bucket ready beforehand so you don't end up with a mess on the floor like I have now. And then from this point, you should be able to pull the coolant bottle up from the top with the hose attached. Go ahead and see if you can pull that up. And try to remember which way it's routed to. So when you put it back in there, it's routed the right way. There you go. At this point, you can start working on some of the stuff at the top of the motor. Get your air filter off, intercooler pipes. We've already got a couple of them loosened up down here. The intercooler pipe clamps are 11mm. Take them off down there, up here. You get the idea. And then either a screwdriver or 8mm, 5/16, whichever you prefer, to take your air filter off. To get this pipe off, you're going to want to take your map sensor off. And that's 10. Of course it's 10. Everything's 10. Yeah, 10mm. Now. And then, oh. Done. And then this pipe just slides right out then. Hooked on everything. There we go. Now that the pipes are out of the way, you should be able to pull the intercooler out. This stupid thing's in the way. There we go. Tempted to throw that thing in the trash can. Next, you're going to want to remove these 2 transmission cooler lines that run at the bottom of the radiator. They're 5/8 inch. If they're not too corroded, you can use a regular wrench, but if they're anything like mine, you're going to want to get some flare nut wrenches, line wrenches, whatever you want to call them. They're like this. And if it's really bad like mine is, you might not even be able to get them off. The one that I did get off, I had to use some penetrating oil and let it sit overnight, and it finally came loose. This one here, it won't come off. So what I'm going to end up doing is cutting it probably about right in here where there's enough length that I can get a long enough piece of hose slid over it. Should be 3/8, I believe, and be able to put 2 clamps on it just to make sure it doesn't come off going down the highway. But that's what 20 years worth of salty Midwest winters will do for you. So this is an issue that a lot of you guys might have as well. If you're from the South, you probably won't have that issue, or not nearly this bad. if you do have to cut like I do, I'd recommend getting yourself one of these little tubing cutters like this. That way it leaves you a nice clean cut when you're done, and you're not damaging other stuff with whatever other tools you might want to use. Imagine some people might want to try to grab a Sawzall. Probably wouldn't recommend that. One thing I didn't mention a minute ago too was, you know, sometimes you can still get them off if you can, but the actual fitting part that goes into the radiator here will want to spin too. That is 1/16 if you need to back it up to keep it from spinning and maybe snug it back up. Once you get your lines underneath disconnected, there's two 10mm bolts up here at the top that hold the shroud on. The bottom is just held in by a couple of little tabs. Once you get those out, you won't be able to lift the radiator out with the shroud because of the way the whole core support is here. So you'll still have to disconnect the shroud, but once you get everything unhooked from the radiator, you can just move it forward like that. You can just leave the shroud hang on the fan and pull the radiator out, and you don't have to try to worry about getting the fan clutch and all that stuff off working over the top like that. If you want, you can opt to remove the fan and the fan clutch along with the shroud at the same time, but mine's pretty stuck on there, so I'm going to do it the hopefully easier route. Actually, once you get it wiggled around just right, it's actually not too bad. You can get the fan shroud kind of sitting on those tabs that are inside the frame rails there, and now I've got plenty of room to get all this out, even with that extra piece of transmission cooler line right there hanging off of it. Alright, so once you get the radiator lifted out of the way, I put a little note on there because if you do this wrong, you'll be pulling your fan clutch back off if you do it in the wrong order. So now you can just get this wiggled back around there, and then out it comes. Now you've got plenty of room to work on getting that fan clutch off of there a heck of a lot easier than having a bunch of stuff in the way. Alright, so next you're going to take the fan clutch and fan off at the same time. I don't have the proper tools to do that, so rather I could go down to the local parts store and rent one, but I prefer to just do things with stuff I already have if possible. So what I'll usually do is just take a big crescent wrench like this. This is a big one from Harbor Freight. Pipe wrench will work too. I've used that before. And then, you know, normally if you try to just pop it off like that, it just slips on the belt. So take a big breaker bar here, push it to the right, and that will put more tension on the belt, and then whack that with a hammer. Don't do that. So as you just saw, make sure you have a good grip on the thing. It's got a little bit more weight than you think. I thought I had a good enough grip, and obviously I didn't. At this point, you can take the belt off. That's obviously pretty simple. Just get a 1/2-inch breaker bar, 1/2-inch drive breaker bar, pull it, slide the belt off, and there you go. If you haven't disconnected your batteries yet, now is a great time to do so before we go on to the next step. So now I'm going to take the starter off, and the main reason for that is because there's two drain plugs in the block. There's one right there, and there's one there. You can kind of see it up there. What that's going to do is that's going to let the coolant drain out of the engine block, so that when you pull the engine, it doesn't make an even bigger mess. And if you're anything like me, you're getting tired of coolant 2 days later. Yeah, I've been working slow, but 2 days later, I've still got coolant dripping out of the hoses onto the floor, and I'm getting tired of the mess. So, move on to the starter here. There's two different types of starters. There's this style here where it's only got 2 bolts, the offset here. There's a bolt there, and then there's one right up here. I can feel it. I'm touching it. So, then there's the 3-bolt style. Those are the more inline ones, and there'll be another bolt right here, but mine doesn't have that. So like I said, those are 17mm. Alright, so yours may be a little different than mine, but this big lug here was 17 millimeter on mine. This little one here is a Phillips head screw, and with as much corrosion on there, I can imagine this is probably going to be pretty disastrous for me, so we'll see how this goes. So the proper size for this screw is penetrating oil and vice grips. Not sure what idiot thought that was a good idea. Alright, now we can work on the drain plugs. That one right there is not the drain plug you're looking for. That's actually the, usually people use that as an inspection port to see if you have forged or powdered metal connecting rods. And keep in mind with this, you're going to want a pretty good sized drain pan. Some people use like a little kiddie pool or something like that, because you're probably going to make a mess with this. I mean, you could just let it sit there and drip like that if you've got time, which I think that's actually what I'm going to do. Yeah, the one on the other side of my truck, it's rounded out, it's too stuck, and so I'm just going to have to deal with that. At this point, you can go ahead and get your radiator hoses completely off, and your heater hoses, you know, just some channel locks or pliers or something, and there's one over here too. And then you can just flop them off to the side. Here's another little tip for you. Earplugs. Keeps fluids in, keeps dirt out. Now that I've got a nice place to stand, I'm going to start working on getting the turbo out of here, because that has to be removed in order to get the engine out. Ignore the fact that the AC condenser and the transmission cooler are still in the way. We'll get to that later. I have my reasons, and you'll figure that out soon enough. To remove the turbo, obviously we have to get the intake spider here out first. Pretty simple. This red line is not normally... Ooh, that's nasty. Not normally supposed to be there. I had it there because I was experimenting with something. There's a lot of debate over whether or not to leave that red line plugged in back there where it's supposed to be. I'm not going to go into that on this video because it doesn't matter at this point in time. So as far as that goes, you do your own research and you determine what you want to do with your truck. So just pull all these off. I might need to replace these if they rip. This is your air intake heater. Some people delete that. Makes a great place to put a fitting for a boost gauge. Getting that out of there will definitely help with airflow. So it's up to you whether you want to take that out or not. So much grease. At this point, if you have an early 99, you're going to notice there's a few minor differences. I've never pulled one on an early 99, but as far as I know, the differences are pretty insignificant. The biggest difference is that these intake plenums here are 2-inch on early 99 like they are on the OBS's, and these are 3-inch. But besides that, I do believe everything is the same. If it's not the same, I'm sure the differences are probably insignificant enough that the basic idea of the job here is the same and you won't really have to do too much different. you get that loosened up, just take a screwdriver or something and pop that loose. Just grab a hold of it. And out it comes. Now, you don't necessarily have to, but I would highly recommend pulling these boots off and cleaning them up really good. You know, with the PCV system still intact like mine is, you get a lot of oil. And that can cause issues with everything sealing up. One thing I'd highly recommend you do too is put some rags or put some tape, do something over those. There is a little screen in there to keep big stuff from going down in there, but let's face it, it's not going to help with smaller contaminants. That screen isn't even really going to stop even somewhat larger stuff. And I don't think I really need to explain why that's a problem. And this here, it's connected to the PCV down here. I've always just been able to lift it up and pop it out of there. Like so. Next, you're going to take the downpipe clamp off and the clamp for the collector. Kind of hard to see back in there. Both of those are 11 millimeter. The one on the collector is not typically fun once you get it loose. I'm going to do my best to attempt to show you all this. Focus. There. So once you get the nut backed off enough, keep a look off to the left there, you can see it sliding out. And then you can pop it up and out of there. Rather difficult to do with one hand. Like so. That little T part there locks into the other part of the clamp. And then you're going to take a screwdriver or a chisel or something and give that a whack so that it pops loose. You're going to get a chisel or something down on there where it's on the actual clamp. And then should pop off like that. It does that in 3 different places. If it's been on there a long time, you're going to have a fun time trying to get to it, especially if you're basically laying on the engine. Another thing you can do, depending on how the clamp is positioned, is get a screwdriver in here and try to get up underneath part of it. Usually easier said than done. For me, this has always been the most difficult part of pulling the turbo on one of these. If you're gentle, you can go against the outer part of the clamp. And it doesn't look like that's going to work for me this time. Oh, there we go. And this part, you're pretty much going to have to kind of go by feel to get the bottom part of the clamp off. I'll show you what you're looking at here, though. You can try to get in there and pop this bottom part off, same way you did the other ones. Then once you get the clamp completely loose, just kind of spread it out a little bit and slide it back over the collector. That way it's out of the way of the turbo. You can just leave it on the collector and just kind of feel around, make sure it's completely released from the turbo, and you're good. Now we'll move on to the downpipe clamp. Same process, just a little easier to get to. Once you've got that all loose, same deal. You can just, come on. There you go. Slide it over the downpipe and let her hang. Next, these are 13 millimeter. And they're quite snug, to say the least. But there's one there, and then there's one on the back side there. Just take those out. Another pro tip for you. If you need some extra leverage, you have a Craftsman ratchet, a 3/4 inch socket fits real nice over it, and then you just put an extension on it. Oh! Wow. I think it's safe to say that these have never been off. Oh, there we go. One other thing you'll have to do before you remove the turbo is remove the rod for the back pressure valve. You just take that, and it's kind of difficult, but you got to push this little thing here that way, and it will release off of the little stud down there. So what I just did was I just got my pry bar down here, and yours won't have that bolt in it, but there's this little lip right here that you can use for a leverage point. Just get your pry bar in there like that, and then just push sideways, and it pops over. And then you get in here and just pop it down. Once you get that popped down, you can then lift the turbo. Oh man, mine's stuck. Alright, well, you get the idea. Alright, at this point the turbo's loose. And then you just pick it up. And finagle it out of here. And there we go. Alright, so for the alternator, you'll need to take this off. This is a 10 mil. And for this, I was just, especially doing it one-handed, I just take a screwdriver down in here to help release the tab, and then just pull up on it. Get that out of the way. These 3 screws here, or bolts, are 13 millimeter. Next, I'm going to drain the power steering fluid system. May not be necessary, depending on how you plan on doing it. There might be enough room in the lines to swing it off to the side. I've never tried it that way. It's just always been easier for me to just drain it and take it out. And to prevent as much mess as possible, rather than unhooking the lines off of the bracket up there to drain it and just letting it drool all over everything, I come up here up to the front to the power steering cooler, that's what this little guy is, and take the lines off and let it drain down into your drain pan. And just let that drain for a while. And then to take the power steering pump off, you'll take that off down there. It's the main pressure line. That's a, what is that? 18 millimeter. That's probably never been off either. Then take this line here off. That's your return line. There's another line coming off the bottom of the reservoir you have to remove, and then you'll be able to get the bracket out with the pump. Now that the lines are off, you're going to take these 4 bolts out. They're 13 millimeter. All right, next you can take the those two wires there, they run into a harness that runs down through here and up here to the solenoid. You can take those off. That's a 14 millimeter. I'm sure by now you've noticed that I'm jumping around quite a bit, and that's definitely true. I'm just kind of taking stuff off as I see it and remember it. Point to remember though is there really isn't a specific order that any of this has to come off until there's a couple things that there is. But once you get that loosened up off the solenoid, you can take it and just fish it back over here and throw it on top of the engine. And while you're at it too, you can unhook these lines going to the air conditioning. Maybe. Well, that one and that one. And this one, you just get your finger underneath it, lift up, and it pops right off. And then unhook it from your dipstick and just throw it off to the side. While we're over here screwing around, don't forget about this guy here. It's 8 millimeter. It's the ground strap running to the engine. If you forget about it, you'll remember pretty quickly once you start actually pulling the engine, because you'll end up getting hung up and you'll be cussing yourself. And then just take it and try to remember kind of how it was routed. And then just flop it on top of the engine like everything else. While we're messing with grounds, we'll go ahead and take the ones off the front of the engine. That bolt there, or nut actually, is 15 millimeter. You take this front one off and that will allow you to take your transmission lines down and also your positive battery cable that's just supported by that. And then there's also another one right here, that greasy one. That's an 18 millimeter, and that's your ground cable running to the driver's side. And then once you get that nut loosened up off of there, you can take your battery cable support, slide that, and that's also your, like I said, your support for your transmission lines. Just kind of slide that out of the way, and then grab your socket again, and that is also 15 millimeter. Also, while you're up here, this is a good time to disconnect your fuel lines. There's right there, it's your feed and return lines. Obviously my oil cooler has been leaking a lot, so they look disgusting. If yours look like that, I would definitely recommend cleaning them off before you unhook them, because you just don't want to get crap into your fuel system. So I'm just going to hose them down with brake cleaner, and hopefully my drain pan catches most of it. So with your fuel lines, you're going to want to take these and just kind of get them out of the way there. And then you'll need one of these or something equivalent, fuel line disconnect tool, and get it slid over the line. And then this is going to be hard for me to do one-handed. You're going to just push it in. Sometimes it helps to push on the line a little bit too, this way. But you're going to take that tool and you're going to push it into the fitting and kind of rotate it a bit, and you'll feel it kind of slide in, and then you can just pull the fuel line apart and keep your drain pan handy, because you're definitely going to lose some fuel here. So after fighting for over 30 minutes on the quick connect, this happened, started coming apart. So yeah, I'll deal with this problem later. Also, while you're up here, you can go ahead and take this apart. You can just take the wiring harness off with the engine, unbolt that, and just flop it off to the side. That is a 10 millimeter for this. And once you get the bolt out so far, just grab hold of it and pulls out. And then just find somewhere off to the side to let it hang. I'm sure you noticed in the last clip the little elbow coming off the water pump is gone. That's not required. I took that off to try to get better access to those fuel lines that obviously eventually I just got fed up with and cut. Yeah, I have to take mine off anyway because it looks like crap, and I'm going to replace it while it's out. I'm going to be doing the water pump as well, but that's not relevant to pulling the engine. Now, before we forget, make sure you put these things back in. I don't know a torque spec, just, you know, like a lot of other things, use your head, make it pretty snug. You can kind of tell by the rust marks too where it was before, so try to get it about there. Alright, so now we're going to take the torque converter inspection plate off. Those are 3/8. Finally get to use something that isn't metric. There's one there, and then one up on the side there, or actually two up on the side. There's 4 bolts. Alright, this is where my truck will likely differ from yours. We're going to take the torque converter bolts out now. The factory style converters typically have studs sticking off of them with nuts, whereas the aftermarket, like mine, I have a BTS transmission, and he uses a PI Stallion converter. They use 9/16 bolts, or that's the socket size. You'll need to take them off as 9/16. So as far as the factory ones go that have the studs, I don't remember what size those are off the top of my head, but these ones here with the PI Stallion are 9/16. And while you're doing this, obviously you're going to want to rotate the motor around. Well, you have to. And the best way to do that is to come up front here on the crank pulley. You can use a 15/16 socket, or what was it, 24 millimeter fit pretty good too. With my sockets, the 15/16 seem to fit a little bit tighter. And you're going to want to spin it clockwise looking from the front. This part here, having a helper, makes it go a lot quicker for obvious reasons. If you can manage to squeeze your body underneath the axle on a creeper, or I guess even on the floor, to slide up here to rotate the engine around, that helps too, but your best bet's just to have somebody help out or crawl out from underneath the truck is probably what I'm going to have to do here. By the way, there are 6 of the torque converter bolts or nuts, whatever you may have. You can see about, yeah, you can see 3 bolts if you get the engine lined up right all at one shot. So you can work on those. Once you get all of your nuts or bolts off, you want to make sure the converter is actually loose from the flex plate. The bolted style is a lot easier because you can just take it and spin it, which makes reassembly a lot easier. It's just 6 less things you have to try to line up when you're getting everything mated back together. But either way, you want to make sure that it's no longer attached, because you don't want to try to pull the torque converter out with the engine. You're going to have some major issues if you do that. This part here isn't 100% necessary, but it'll probably be worth your time to go ahead and do it. If you have, especially if you have a 4-inch exhaust, 4-inch downpipe, you're probably going to want to go ahead and just remove it. For the 5 minutes it takes to remove it, it'll probably save you 20 minutes worth of hassle and fighting around it. Next, you can remove some, but not all, of your bell housing bolts. There's 6 of them. At this point, it's safe to take 4 of them out. It'd be the top 4. You're going to want to leave the bottom 2. You can see there's one there. This is on the driver's side of the truck, obviously. There's another one. And then up top there. Now with the downpipe out of the way, you have much easier access to everything. You can see all 3 bell housing bolts here, there, and up there. I've already got that top one loosened up, so what we're going to do is take that top one out and then go up underneath the hood, or I guess you can do it from underneath here too. Just gently wiggle the dipstick out. Apparently mine wants to come out over here. Normally they're supposed to come out over here. And here's another thing you're going to not want to forget about. Your block heater plug. Just take some channel locks or something, grab a hold of it. Already got mine loosened up. And then Just wiggle that out, and there you go. Next, you can drain your oil and take the oil filter off, as I've already done. So now we're finally going to do something with the air conditioning compressor and the condenser. The way you're supposed to do it is have the AC system evacuated with the refrigerant pulled out responsibly instead of just dumping it into the atmosphere. But I didn't feel like going through the trouble of doing that and then having to recharge the system after I get done. So I'm going to take the AC compressor off and just kind of set it off to the side. And then the flexible lines, you can just move the condenser out of the way when you're pulling the engine. The bolts for the air conditioning compressor are 10 millimeter. If yours is original like mine appears to be, they sometimes get a little stuck on there after this many years, so you might need to persuade it with like a dead blow hammer or something, or just get a pry bar up underneath here and pry up on it. Just don't hit the clutch with a hammer. You want to take this off of your AC lines as well. There's not really a good way for me to describe how to get it apart, but you can see it's got like a double lock there, so you'll need two different screwdrivers to kind of pry in different directions. You just have to kind of figure that one out, because I can't hold the camera and show you how to get it apart at the same time. We'll come back to the condenser here in a few minutes. You want to take your tensioner off of this bracket and then take the bracket itself off. All those are 13 millimeter. There's 4 bolts that hold it on. And there are different length bolts for this bracket. There's 2 shorter ones and 2 longer ones. The shorter ones are going to go in these 2 holes where obviously it's recessed in more, and then the longer ones are going to go up here. Alright, so the condenser's out of the way now. We may have to make some minor adjustments here and there, mainly with the compressor. You know, the engine does come up quite a bit, so we might be able to clear it. Probably have to move it some, like I said. But it's pretty much what it should look like now. You want to be very careful with it so you don't end up ruining your lines or kinking them or anything like that. You might kink them a little bit. Mine's kind of looking a little iffy there, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Like I said, this isn't the correct way to do it. This is just a way to do it. If I were to do it again, I would probably just go ahead and do it right, because that was kind of a pain to get that stuff like that, because you have to kind of rotate the AC condenser, and right now it's just resting on the hook, which I'm probably going to have to bend those fins back. So I'm not going to recommend doing it this way, but you can if you want. So now at this point we can go ahead and get the transmission cooler just kind of swung out of the way. These are 8 millimeter. It holds that on. You may have a bigger transmission cooler. I probably should, but yeah, we'll worry about that some other time. And there's also 2 8 millimeter bolts down here for the transmission cooler. And you're going to want to pop this thing out too. It's just a little push pin thing down there that'll give you more room to swing your transmission lines around. So you should end up with something that looks kind of like this. We'll just lift the transmission cooler up when the engine lift is in there. Next, you're going to take the engine mount bolts out. There's 2 on the passenger side of the truck, 1 there and 1 up there, and then 2 more on the driver's side. 1 there and 1 there, and those are 13/16 or I think 21 millimeter. I'd also recommend loosening these up. Don't take them completely out, but you can see the slots in there. It'll just give you a little bit of flexibility and being able to move the transmission forward and backward a little bit if needed. Those are also 13/16, or like I said, I think 21 millimeter. Also, depending on your engine lift, you may have to remove your power steering cooler. It's up to you if you want to. If your engine lift has a long enough arm on it, you probably won't have to, but I'm going to take mine off here. It's bolt there and there, obviously, and they are both 10 millimeter. Now you can get your engine lift hooked up, and I'm going to wait for my help to get here. Once he gets here, we're going to find out the tensile strength of everything that I forgot to unhook, as well as most likely simultaneously destroy my wiper cowl. One thing that'll help too is take this piece off, just held in by little push pins, and zip tie it up out of the way so you don't destroy it like I almost did. Alright, so at this point we've got the engine lifted up partway. That side's free. This side isn't quite yet. Underneath here, you're going to want to support the transmission, obviously. So we've got a jack underneath it for now, and also a jack stand. It's not really the greatest place to put a jack on the transmission, but it's not really putting much weight on it. Just enough to support it, and then we'll lower it down on the jack stand once the engine's out. Right, once you get the engine lifted up so far, you can come underneath here with a pry bar. You probably can't really see it, but there's we got the engine separated some. Once I put the pry bar in there, the engine moved, so everything is pretty loose now. We might be able to get the engine out. Now that the engine's out, this is a great time to take advantage of how easy it is to work on. As you can see, I've done my water pump. It's a good time to redo your fuel line seals, the little rubber gaskets that go into these things here on both sides. Obviously, your turbo pedestal with the back pressure delete stuff. There's the other fuel line. It's a good time to reseal your inlet and outlet lines in your fuel bowl, and those feed lines down in there. It's pretty much a bunch of while you're at it kind of stuff. Exhaust manifolds, oil cooler, you get the idea. So at this point, we can go ahead and start working on doing the oil pan. Now, as far as replacing the oil pan, there is a right way to do it and several not so right ways. I already kind of went over couple of those methods earlier in the video where, you know, people will cut the cross member out and do it in the truck, stuff like that. So the proper way is to put the engine on an engine stand and actually flip it upside down. And the reason for that is because you don't want to get any oil contamination in your sealant while it's curing. The method that I'm going to be using is a bit different. I'm not actually going to be putting it on an engine stand because A, I don't have one. I don't feel like buying one that I'm going to use probably one time, and then it's going to sit there taking up space in my garage for the next 6 years. Might use it again, but at this point it's really not necessary. The way I'm going to show you, like I said, is not exactly the right way to do it, but if you do it the right way, it'll work just fine. And the other reason is I really don't feel that it's necessary at this point. My engine's been sitting here on the floor for probably about 3 weeks at this point. I've been busy with other stuff and taking a vacation and all that, so I'm fairly confident that pretty much every drop of oil in the engine is down at the bottom now. So I'm not too concerned about it, and I will be cleaning up inside the block a little bit too, just to make sure, but we'll get to that here in a few minutes. We can start by removing the dipstick here, or dipstick hole, whatever, dipstick tube. That off of there, and then this is 13 millimeter. And of course, just like almost every step of the process here with this project, I had a little bit of issues. Sometimes this can get stuck on here pretty good, and you'll end up doing that to your dipstick tube there. So you might want to have another one of those on hand, or just be real careful with this nut. Now we can go ahead and take the bolts off to hold the oil pan on. There is 6 of them on each side. If you can't do math, that's 12 total. And I would recommend at this point the outer 4, just loosen those up and let them hang a little bit. Just thread them back in a couple of turns, and you'll see why here in a second. These are all 10 millimeter, by the way. Now that all the bolts are removed except for your 4 in the corner that are just loose, you can take a hammer and hit it. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you need to get up into the groove there and pry on it a little bit. If you do have to pry on it, pry very gently. I'm going to just try beating on this, see how that works. All right, now that it's all loose, there's still going to be a little bit of silicone holding it together back by your rear main, back up in there, and also up front here. But what you can do now, I'm not going to be able to show you this, but you can figure it out on your own because I need both hands. But get in there and pry on it gently after your bolts are out, and just make sure you hold on to it, because I can pretty much guarantee you there's going to be a little bit of residual oil left in the bottom of the pan. So obviously that's going to make a freaking mess if you drop it on the floor. And what I'm doing here too, I have the front 2 bolts removed on the front of the pan. I'm leaving the back ones still threaded in because the residual oil is obviously going to be back here on the back part of the pan. So it just has less leverage working against it if you were to leave the front ones. And as we're loosening everything up, once the front's completely loose, you can hold on to it and gently unthread the bolts on the back part here, and then hopefully just be able to drop it down without making a mess. Another advantage of leaving these back 2 bolts in is once you get the front drop down, the oil pan will actually sit up against your flywheel or your flex plate and help hold it up there for you. Now that your oil pan's off, there's a couple of important things to look at here. First one would be your oil pickup tube here. Some trucks, these did have a tendency to crack, and you would know most likely because you end up having startup issues, and you can only start your truck if it's facing downhill. But you want to check that, make sure it's not cracked, make sure it's secure. You're also going to want to look here and make sure there isn't a bunch of debris in your oil pickup. It's also a good time to grab a hold of your connecting rods and stuff like that and make sure there isn't a bunch of slop in them or anything like that, because obviously that means you're about ready to throw one. And also look for signs of heat and stuff like that. You can also look up into your cylinder walls and kind of see the condition of those, if they are gouged at all. Another thing to note here too is you can definitely tell at this point whether you have forged connecting rods or the powdered metal. If you see this here with a stud and a nut, then you have forged connecting rods, which are obviously the better of the two. If you have a bolt just running, the head of the bolt will be down here and just running straight up into it, then that means you have the powdered metal connecting rods. So now at this point, once you're done inspecting everything and are happy with all of that, you can go ahead and go through here and start cleaning all this goop off of here, trying very carefully not to get any of it into your bearings or on your timing gears or anything like that that could potentially cause problems. Unfortunately, I don't have any magic tricks on how to get all that silicone and stuff off of there. Pretty much just going to have to use some old-fashioned elbow grease. You can use a whiz wheel if you really want, but I wouldn't recommend it just because I don't like the idea of a bunch of uncontrolled debris flying around the bottom end of my engine. So you should have it looking about like that. I haven't wiped it down yet with brake cleaner, but what I used to clean it off was an old hotel key card. Those work great for scrapers. Just any kind of plastic scraper, you don't want to gouge the parts. I also used a mild scuff pad and a little bit of sandpaper to get some of the rust off in some of the areas. I wouldn't really go more than about, any more aggressive than about probably 320 sandpaper, because once again, you don't want to be gouging into the parts and all that stuff. And if you're lucky too, most of the silicone will actually come off on the oil pan here, and since we're not reusing it, who cares? And when you're doing this, use your head, guys. If you're doing it like I am, where it's just suspended from an engine lift, Don't put your thick skull underneath here, because if this thing falls on you, it'll kill you. This next step here is pretty critical. You're going to want to do this before you put the pan on the engine, and that is installing your dipstick flange. So there's two different orientations that you can put this. If you're doing this on an OBS, you're going to want it on the more vertical position like that. But on a Super Duty, make sure it's on the more forward-facing position. And there's also an O-ring right here. You need to make sure that's in there. And then take the nut and tighten it on there. And to snug that nut down, use a 2-inch socket or a big crescent wrench, whatever you got. But the official size is close enough to 2-inch. I don't know if it's exactly 2 inches, but 2-inch fits. Next, you want to make sure that you get as much of the old silicone and grease and stuff off of the bolts as you can. We've already cut one corner by not using an engine stand. This is one of those places here where you don't want to cut corners, just like cleaning. I didn't want to do this job to begin with, and I certainly don't want to do it again because I screwed up. While regular RTV would probably work, I wouldn't want to take my chances with it. So go to your international dealer, get some of this, or you can go to your Ford dealership and they sell, I believe it's the same exact thing, just in a different package. And the part for that is, the part number for that is TA31. But don't cheap out on your silicone sealant here. So these next set of steps here all need to be done pretty quickly. I've seen some books where they say it needs to be done within 3 minutes. I've seen others where they give you up to 10 minutes. But what you need to do is put silicone all around this. You need an 1/8 inch bead along both sides. And then on both ends here, you're going to want to put a 1/4 inch bead. Make sure you get a little bit of the silicone on all the way around the bolt holes. But like I said, you will need to work quickly. Once you get your silicone put on here, you'll take it over to your engine and get 4 bolts started, 1 at each corner, and lightly snug it up to the engine. Grab the rest of your bolts, get them started, and torque them down to 18 foot-pounds. Like I said, you've got anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes to complete all of this, so work quickly, but carefully. Then once you've got your shiny new oil pan put on there, you can install your dipstick. Just put a little bit of oil on the O-ring there. I bought a new one, so either way, put a little, even if you're reusing your old one, put a little oil on the new O-ring and get it and just slide it down in there. Apparently, Chinese-made garbage from one manufacturer isn't compatible with Chinese garbage from another manufacturer. So, yeah, have to resort to this. Once you've got everything put together, now you're going to want to wait at least 24 hours before you put any oil or anything in here. All right, guys, girls, whatever the hell you identify as, that's pretty much the end of the video here. If you need to know how to put everything back together, just go ahead and put the video in reverse and try that. I wanted to record putting everything back together, but unfortunately I was running out of time, and since this is my work truck that I was working on, I needed some money and didn't really have the time to record everything as I was putting everything back together. You'd be amazed at how much extra time that adds. So I know I left out several details as far as, you know, torque specs and whatnot. A lot of those are available online, or I would highly recommend buying a Chilton's manual or a Haynes manual, whatever you have available to you. They have all the torque specs listed for pretty much everything in those books. That's the main reason I have them, is just for the torque specs. So besides that, I hope this video helps all of you out. Maybe you are now confident in doing this job yourself, or maybe you watched it and you're like, yeah, no, I am not capable. Either way, it helped you out, so I'm satisfied with that. So either way, if you got anything out of this video, go ahead and subscribe, because I've got several more videos coming down the line here. Just got to get them all edited down since I finally got a new confuser. I know it's been a long time since I've posted anything. So yeah, have a good day or something, whatever all the YouTube people say at the end of their videos.